was Her Majesty the Queen versus Christopher James Clay and Jordan Kent Prentice. The accused were jointly charged that on or about the 17th day of May 1995, the City of London did unlawfully traffic in a narcotic, namely cannabis sativa, contrary to Section 4, subsection 1 of the Narcotic Control Act.
How has this affected your future, all of this?
Chris is facing 3 life sentences. Clearly, Parliament has an obligation to make sure that the law is sound before they expose this man to 3 life sentences.
Chris Clay is the owner of the Hemp Nation retail store in London. Jordan Prentice is one of his employees. Nearly 2 years ago, they were arrested for selling a small cannabis plant to an undercover police officer and hit with a variety of charges. Clay has decided to use the case as an opportunity to challenge the country's cannabis laws. He's hired 2 Toronto lawyers, Paul Burstein and Osgoode Hall law professor Alan Young, to handle his case. During the course of the trial, the defense is expected to call expert witnesses from across North America, including a Harvard psychiatrist and a senior scientist with the Addiction Research Foundation. Young says if his clients are convicted on the original charges, he will then launch a constitutional challenge, arguing that it is beyond the authority of Parliament to criminalize harmless conduct.
How did we ever get involved in this? I mean, we've never touched that stuff. We don't smoke. We're never interested. And here we are, at this stage in our lives, somehow semi-funding a constitutional challenge for marijuana. I just can't believe what happened. You never know what life is going to give you.
I tried smoking pot maybe twice when I was 16, and I ended up drinking. I thought that must be safer because it was legal. And it wasn't until I was about 21, going to Ryerson, that I first really got into it. And while I was studying there, that's when I started to research the hemp and marijuana issue. So when I came back to London for the summer, I had a booth at a flea market just distributing literature, and it was just overwhelmingly popular. People were coming and they wanted information and books. So after 4 weekends, I ended up getting a store, and then I got a youth venture loan from the government to get some more inventory. We did pretty good for the first 2 years, although I'd never had any business experience, so I had to learn a lot of things the hard way. We had some things made from hemp clothing and paper and whatnot. And we also had pipes and bongs and grow guides and seeds to grow marijuana.
We had the best deal in Canada. We would sell 6 seeds for $25 with a 100% germination guarantee, which just means, they'll all pop, they'll all germinate and grow.
I did that very openly, actually. No, the police never hassled me at all. I had a big sign in the window with all the strains listed.
Yeah, I think he operated for 4 years without any problems until this undercover officer went in and bought this little seedling. And that's how the case started. Why did he sell these clones? He sold them because he wants people to grow their own pot so they don't have to become part of the black market and perpetuate all the evils that are associated with the black market. And he knew what he was doing. He knew he'd get caught. I mean, he wasn't doing this in a subterranean way like a drug trafficker trying to make a lot of money.
And well, if I win, everybody wins. It's going to be legalized for industrial, recreational, and medical purposes. Now, these are 3 very separate issues. Some people are only interested in one instead of all of them. But unfortunately, these laws link them all together. So, I'm kind of involved with all of them right now.
I didn't realize that he was going to start selling these bongs and things like that, because I definitely wouldn't have approved of that. However, he did it, and my name's on the note, so I have no choice, but I have to continue to support him.
I was selling pipes and bongs since I opened, though.
You were?
Yeah. The first day I had pipes.
I thought it was just all, oh boy. Anyway.
No, I didn't have many. I didn't have many.
Well, and you were selling those seeds, and then when you got those plants down there, I almost hit the roof. And the reason why you did it, I guess you wanted to get, he wanted to get arrested, he wanted to get this thing in the courts and so on, but...
I never dreamed they'd seize the inventory. That's what really screwed me over.
This made me very angry that you did that. Mm-hmm. And I think that was a foolish thing to do. I don't know if...
Spontaneous?
Spontaneous, yeah.
Someone brought them in, and I decided, all right, now's the time.
Would you do anything spontaneous like that again?
Well, I don't know. We'll have to see how this turns out before
Well, I'm not signing any loans for you again, that's it.
live in the suburbs. It's a quiet house, and we had a police drug raid. They kicked the door in and, trashed my room and guarded my mother for 3 hours so she wouldn't destroy evidence.
And who would ever believe that I would be watched by a police officer for 3 hours in my own
That was
home?
probably the most disturbing thing to me, because they were trying to stop Chris. They were trying to intimidate him. They didn't want this challenge to continue. Certainly there are other people in the country that are much more vocal than Chris is, but the fact is Chris was involved in a constitutional challenge, and there's no doubt in my mind that they want to put as much pressure on him as possible. And they thought, well, maybe if we invade his home, that he'll realize that this whole thing is not worthwhile. I think it made all of us more angry, and probably made me more determined. I was very much an establishment type, and I didn't really challenge anything. I didn't want to rock the boat, but when it happens to you, when somebody comes in your house like that, that is scary, and it can happen in Canada.
I mean, what a waste of money to pay a police officer 3 hours time to watch me.
Someone robbed the bank in the Galleria Mall while they were raiding the store that day.
The day that we got busted, the bank got robbed. There's a little bar just 2 doors down. One of the crackheads from there went to the Galleria Mall a block away, robbed the bank. Where'd the bank robber go? He went next door and bought rounds of beers for everybody in the bar. And they blew all the money, got really wasted, left. And by the time the police got down there, he was gone and had spent all the money, so there was nothing they could do. And here we are getting busted, Harass the pot smokers, but leave all the drunks and bank robbers and crack addicts alone. Because marijuana seeds are much more dangerous than an armed robber waving a gun in someone's face. That's the way it is in the world. So Chris can do life for selling marijuana seeds, and the armed robber gets away with armed robbery.
Beautiful day out. Nice little hike in the woods. You'll get some blood running through the body. Especially if you live in the city, it's beautiful to grow because it gets you out into the country.
When it comes to gardening, you should have one golden rule over every other rule. The only people that need to know about your garden are people that are going to help you with the garden. That people that need to know about the garden.
Now, just doing this with plants in your back is fun. Realize this is life imprisonment in Canada. Cultivation carries trafficking by the criminal code, which maximum penalty is life imprisonment. So right now, this is basically, I guess I'm committing a life, something that I should serve life in jail for.
Here is the most tragic case. Yes, I remember. Just a young boy. Under the influence of the drug, he killed his entire family with an axe.
Why did you do all this?
I was angry, and I thought the law should change. So politicians wouldn't listen.
What you have to understand in terms of Canada, that our first drug laws were not directed at drugs per se.
And what it was about was the smoking opium factories run by Chinese, and the Chinese were resented for their trade unionists would work for. And at the turn of the century,
the first drug legislation was introduced in the House, and it received absolutely, virtually no comment. And opium smoking was prohibited.
And then things proceeded apace, really. Cocaine was criminalized in 1911, and there was a flirtation with the prohibition of alcohol during 1918, 1919. This is very much sort of temperance ideology of the time. Marijuana was criminalized in 1923 with no debate. All that was said in the House of Commons was, there is a new drug in the schedule.
I discovered a book by Judge Emily Murphy. She was the first woman appointed to the bench in the British Empire.
This book had been serialized in Maclean's. It argued that marijuana was a new menace, that if you smoke the dried leaves of the plant, this produces insanity.
And that's where, in fact, we got our first prohibition against marijuana, from the writings of Emily Murphy in 1923.
So you introduce a law, presumably because there's a problem. There wasn't any problem. There weren't any convictions until 1937. And then from 1937 to 1961, you get about 10 to 12 convictions per year. And then in the mid-60s, 1,000 people in 1967 coming to court charged with marijuana possession. And the figures grew from there.
With the hippie movement, middle-class kids and upper-middle-class kids began dressing like lower-class kids. And when they began to be subject to these punitive laws and broad powers of arrest, search, and seizure, and the violence associated with drug enforcement, then all of a sudden, we had to have a royal commission. God knows my kids can't be treated like the way we treat the Chinese or lower class white heroin users.
It was terrible to see your son in jail and go and visiting him out at the detention center.
I went.
And he's coming out there with all these different people, and then Chris comes walking through in the prison garb and, hi, Dad. I couldn't believe I'd ever see my son dressed up like that.
My father had actually put up $5,000 cash to get me out of jail, so, you know, without him, I'd still be in there.
They have a camera on every cell. Like you look up and there's a camera staring in. So I was trying to get a little privacy, put some blankets up, and took my blankets away. Didn't give me any toilet paper.
It was pretty miserable. They leave the lights on all night. I just had to sleep on a metal bed.
I never want to go back there again, but it wasn't the most fun place. I didn't like it. They're just so rude to you. No, I was the only female there that night. I couldn't believe it in the whole city of London. That's what I didn't like. I thought there must be far worse people than I. So it was eye-opening.
I came back from jail. They took me there for the night and found my whole store was empty, so that was quite a shock.
I sort of think it's heroic, and I sort of think he's totally mad. Who wants to get arrested and have a criminal record for their life? And
Oh, technically I face maybe 4 or 5 life sentences now. I'm not even sure. It's hard to keep track of so many charges.
I can't think about it. I just cannot allow myself to think about that. I refuse to accept the worst possible verdict. So I don't even want to talk about that.
You have to bring some hemp products to court.
Sure, well, that's no problem.
A shirt. Yeah, a shirt. Trying to think, you don't have any ties, do you?
Yeah, we have a tie.
Wear one.
Okay.
Because I think that would be nice high drama. I'll take it off you.
Yeah.
and I'll hand it to the animals.
Wait. You're going to take his shirt off?
No, his tie. He said he has a tie.
Okay.
Yes, that's right.
They're the same species, Cannabis sativa, and the differentiation is that marijuana produces and has been selected to produce high levels of cannabinoids, specifically the THC type, whereas hemp is selected for fiber production and screened or selected for low THC production levels.
And because we know what it is about marijuana that makes it psychoactive, it should be incumbent on Parliament to prove, beyond a reasonable doubt, that someone is selling something which can be psychoactive, and not something that you just use to make shirts and rope and twine and things like that.
It'll provide a new crop, new source of income, and a crop that we can develop to finished product. So it has the beginning of a huge industry that we can be a part of the large global picture.
Of course, if you're afraid. That's bitter. That's more like it. I know you like that. Really, you will. Now just take a puff of it.
It cuts across all socioeconomic groupings. It cuts across a range of values, attitudes, and beliefs.
It's predominantly an activity of the young and unattached. When people get to their mid to late 20s, there's a phenomenon known kind of as maturing out or aging out.
That's just kind of like a phase. Like back in the 60s, all the kids used to do it. Some of the adults still do it now, but most of them don't.
My colleagues certainly, who have concerns as I do about the law, absolutely do not believe that young people who use these drugs are criminals, nor should they be treated as criminals.
We got pulled over one time, and I totally forgot I had anything on me, and had to go through just a little bit, and had to go through all fingerprinting, pictures, and everything, and it ended up getting dismissed, and nothing followed, like no criminal record or anything like that, but it was just a waste of time.
No one, I think, could argue that hauling someone into court is an experience that makes a young person more integrated into society and more confident and gives them self-esteem. It's meant to be an extremely negative and humiliating experience.
I was a wreck.
I am the 1% or less than 1% that smokes marijuana on a daily basis, and have been doing so for over 25 years. During that time, I received a university degree, a postgraduate degree. I advanced from assistant management position to management position. I held down a teaching job and received very good performance appraisals on the work I did for them. After 25 years of partaking of a substance that's supposed to destroy me, my brain is not addled, my body's not decrepit.
Well, we have to realize that in today's complex society, the use of cannabis can stretch across various levels of the social strata. So people are able to obtain it by a variety of means. If they happen to be independent wealthy or they happen to have a reliable income, then of course they can access cannabis by means of a more sophisticated business network.
Hey, I'm in a big rush now. If I don't get to the bank in 10 minutes, I can't pay for their hotel room, so I gotta go. See you guys.
This has been much more stressful on him than people realize. He's the type of person that keeps everything inside.
Hi, Sandra. It's Chris calling. Not too much, how you doing? No one opened the store today. I was wondering if you might be able to work today.
The sale of marijuana is even more difficult to detect and halt than the traffic in drugs such as opium, morphine, and heroin.
There's evidence that it can, in fact, lead to more hardcore drugs such as heroin and cocaine.
There is no gateway theory. There is no evidence, there's no theoretical approach. There's nothing to say that the use of cannabis leads to the use of another drug.
I don't touch anything else except a reefer, like a marijuana reefer, like that's it.
Like you can die off alcohol.
I've never touched that, like crack, cocaine, anything like that. That's just
hard drugs.
Yeah, there's no reason for that. I don't think pot can wreck your life really, but if you start doing shit like that, like that'll wreck your life, I think.
I'm still smoking marijuana, so you call it a stepping stone. Yeah, I stepped up and I realized what was up there and I didn't like it, so I came back down.
I'm just off to pick up some more witnesses. We have a good day tomorrow. Eugene Ospapella from the Canadian Foundation for Drug Policy, Marie-Andre Bertrand, she's a criminologist from Montreal, and Diane Riley, she's a sociologist from Toronto. So they're all coming in tonight.
May. May!
What do you want?
Bring me some reefers.
Addiction is one of the old myths which very few people believe in now.
Of the psychoactive drugs that humans take, marijuana is the least likely to produce this kind of behavior. It has a very low likelihood of producing the kind of behavior that we refer to as dependence and addiction. Less than caffeine. Certainly less than alcohol and nicotine.
Cannabis or marijuana is related to just about any kind of street crime. Breaking into houses and stealing goods that can be traded on the street for cash. Breaking into cars these days is quite popular, particularly with cell phones and laptops left carelessly on the seats of cars.
You make something illegal, you create this false scarcity of the product. That drives the price up. And if it's a drug like cocaine or heroin, very different from cannabis, where people can become dependent much more easily, then some of these people turn to crime in order to finance habits. Now that's not true with cannabis because the cost of cannabis is very low relative to even a drug like alcohol.
You see much more crime or what should be caught as crime in bars, say when people get rowdy, break glasses, fight and so on, than you do around marijuana, which is much more pleasant as a social behavior.
You've never heard of anybody getting mugged by somebody who was high on marijuana. That just doesn't happen.
That's the whole point of the case. What are you gonna do with this nice boy? Give him a conviction so he can't get a job? Put him in jail? It doesn't make any sense. You know, jails for people like Clifford Olson, son of Sam. Picture him in jail. He won't survive. What about Jordan Prentice? They'll make them into criminals, you know?
Since August 18th, police have arrested a dozen people in Western Ontario and have pulled up 23,000 pot plants in cornfields and bush lots. They say taking $7 million worth of marijuana off the street is worth the cost of an annual weed control program one of them calls crop busting. 2 choppers in the air, supported by up to a dozen officers on the ground.
It's a lot easier in 30 seconds to go ahead and say, look, we're going to get tough on drugs. That's a great soundbite. It doesn't work in its effect. I mean, the soundbite works. It makes you look great to the public. The fact is you can't get tough on drugs, and more police and more guns and more repression and more violations of individual liberties will not solve the problem, but it makes great media fodder. And that's one of the problems, is that the media feeds on exciting drug busts.
And criminals will take over, police say, if we don't act. Although police say their eye in the sky won't make as big a dent in the marijuana business as the public's eyes, ears, and noses.
That's much more exciting television than sitting and interviewing me.
My main concern was raising money. Until I was arrested in December, we'd only raised about, I think it was maybe $6,000 or $7,000. And we knew we'd need at least $15,000, $20,000. But after that arrest, money started pouring in.
We were making more money in donations than we did in sales on certain days.
You know, it's a shame I have to get arrested to raise money, but it worked. We're up to about $24,000, $25,000 now. So I think we have enough to do it, right?
With Chris sitting behind the computer all day updating the website, like that website that he put together is bar none probably one of the best on the internet right now. People realized what exactly is going on and they donated all this money.
It's kind of like a slideshow with pictures.
Cannabis sativa, the old standby cordage fiber, is staging a strong comeback.
I should make clear that the great majority of users don't suffer any harm from it. But about 60% or more of regular heavy users have evidence of chronic inflammatory lung changes.
Cannabis has some pulmonary hazard, but I think the hazard is minor and it's nowhere near the pulmonary hazard of tobacco cigarettes. Cannabis smokers, whatever their level, inhale less smoke than tobacco cigarette smokers, and it's the dose that makes the poison, whether we're talking about smoke or whether we're talking about individual drugs.
If you smoke cannabis in a water pipe so that there is some condensation of the tar in the water, then you cut down the irritant qualities of the smoke, and that probably would be a good move for anybody who is using it to diminish the risk of lung irritation.
Now, the only other harm of cannabis, proven, is that for a brief period of time it makes you a little stupid and a little clumsy. Cannabis is an intoxicating substance. People get high and they're not at their best in terms of psychomotor function. Nobody should drive while stoned. However, there's not much evidence that cannabis importantly contributes to vehicular mayhem in the Western world.
We got the pharmacologist, Dr. John Morgan, and he'll be at the end of the day. Will medical suffer from various ailments and find that cannabis alleviates the pain. And then something odd will happen is the director of the Bureau of Drug Surveillance will come. He's under our subpoena, and the upshot of what he will talk about is that Health Canada has not done any studies, medical studies, since 1972, the Ledain Commission. And I just find that to be negligent and remiss, considering the Commission said, hey, there's not really a problem here, you should change the law. If you're not going to change the law, do the studies to show that there's a reason to retain the law.
Your Honor, in this case, the state waives trial of the defendant, Ralph Wiley. It is convinced that he is hopelessly and incurably insane, a condition caused by the drug marijuana to which he was addicted.
If I tell you to try it, I'm confident it may not work for you, but it isn't going to hurt you.
Well, it is clearly effective in two things for which it has now been approved for medical use. One is the nausea and vomiting that's induced by anti-cancer chemotherapy. The other use for which it's approved is to stimulate appetite in patients with AIDS, with the wasting syndrome.
For people who are taking it for relief of symptoms, they don't talk much about the high.
It doesn't make me really high or stoned or anything like that. It just it helps my body to function more without shaking, because I shake constantly. And when I smoke, I don't shake. I'm in more control of my body, more control of my mind. And even though they know it's not a cure, it does help. You know, it helps you to control your bowels and your bladder, and especially your bladder, like, that's devastating.
Depending on what pain I'm having at the time or how many, they start to be more tolerable. Then I can actually get up and do something.
Where is the evidence? If this is so, bring it to us. Show us, as you would with any other drug application. We receive in the Department of Health applications daily, dozens, from pharmaceutical companies, from others, saying that this compound or this therapeutic intervention will cause this effect, so please license us to sell it legally. And we'd be delighted to receive that kind of scientific information.
We just have a small representative sample of individuals who have acquired a certain understanding, but then you could start calling the individual scientists who've done certain tests and expand it into international level. That's why governments appoint royal commissions of inquiry, because people like Chris, they can't raise money like that.
Right.
And the government did appoint a royal commission of inquiry, but they didn't like the conclusion it reached.
The Ledain Commission, I think, for the first time, and probably worldwide, was one of the first modern scientific reviews. And it debunked the mythology.
Thousands of youngsters are being criminalized for nothing. Okay, we said that. Then we went into the cannabis thing, and already the political climate was that the liberals were going into election, and they were not sure at all that they would win these elections. By the time we tabled the final report, the House of Commons was in disarray, and not one question. We were thanked for our good services and sent to et cetera, et cetera. So here went 4 years of extreme solid work, according to international opinion, the most solid work that was done in the field. 4 years, 4 books.
And afterwards also several times asked by journalists what did I think about it, and all I could say is, well, there's just nothing you can do. Politics rule everything, and politics unfortunately are not based on intellect. So
everybody expected it to be acted upon because there's a tradition of acting on Royal Commission reports that are well thought out and reasonable, and the government lost heart. They just didn't have the courage to do it. I think we could never persuade a government to take the political heat from the uninformed right, that this would be legalizing drugs, and you couldn't do this, that it would cost the government a large number of seats. I think most people realized that it was logical to do it, but nobody was willing to take the political risk involved.
It's not what it used to be. We were all working towards a common goal before. We were all building up this huge hemp nation so that we would have this great community place to raise awareness, to help people stop getting busted. It's kind of a sinking ship right now, definitely. Chris has to work all kinds of long hours all by himself. He has to do everything because he can't afford to keep us all anymore. He can't pay us. I'd love to keep working for as free as much as I can for as long as I can. I have a house to pay for now. I can't have a house and do what I want at the same time. It sucks, it's a harsh reality, but what am I gonna do? Be happy and be homeless at the same time. They contradict each other, I think. How's it going, Joe? I'm all right. I'm getting depressed.
Well, I was devastated because I live in a small town, so you know, it was splashed all over the paper, and my pot was gone. So I was afraid of what was going to happen with my health. So I had to deal with my health and what people thought and how family and friends dealt with it.
After about 2.5 hours in the principal's office, I was taken down to the school board where I met with the head of personnel. And after a half-an-hour meeting, he dismissed me from the board. I was fired because of the charges that were laid the night before.
I decided to put a constitutional challenge in, and when my lawyer told the court that, then they dropped the charges right away. Well, they mentioned it, but it took them forever to do it. But
did they give a reason why they dropped the charges?
Supposedly compassionate reasons, but if they were so compassionate, why didn't they drop the charges when I was in the hospital a month after they busted me? And my family was told I wasn't going to live. Why didn't they drop the charges then? Why did they wait 1.5 years?
Initially, it was shattering. I had to, in fact, be hospitalized. The one night I thought I was having a heart attack.
I felt robbed of my health and my dignity and my property. And if they would have put me in jail, it wouldn't have hurt me as much as my health has since then.
I don't think if we had tried, we could have designed a system that causes more harm than the present system we have for enforcing our drug laws. It causes more death, destruction, misery, dysfunction than almost any other system we can imagine.
He's taken over the store. He's restocking bongs. It's kind of back to the way it used to be. Passing the torch, they call it. They made a big deal out of it. The trial went so good. I mean, I think something good has to happen. But I don't know. It's hard to say.
I'm very surprised if something doesn't happen.
If nothing came of this, I think that a lot of people would be really upset, obviously. It would just suck if nothing happened. I think at the very least it'd be decriminalized.
Yeah, and Alan said too, like, he would just be happy if he doesn't avoid the issue, even if he rules against us, if he gives a nice ruling and a critique of what we can use in the appeal, for example. But he's hoping that he just doesn't try and get out of it through some technicality. And I feel cheated that way too. Even if I get off, I mean, I could have plea bargained months ago, but I didn't want to. We want to see this resolved somehow.
The defendant will rise. We find the defendant guilty. Is charged.
Former London bookstore owner Mark Emery was the first to light up in front of the courthouse following the ruling. Although he and about a dozen opponents of the marijuana laws were smoking openly, there was no sign of the police.
In his 90-minute-long ruling, McCart said the evidence convinced him that marijuana consumption was harmless, that it caused no serious physical or psychotic damage, and that it did not lead to use of harder drugs. But he also ruled that Parliament determines what is illegal and that the charges did not infringe on the defendant's right. Clay was found guilty of possession and trafficking, but was acquitted on a cultivation charge.
He basically said I'm a criminal. Well, I'm certainly not a criminal, and I think in the minds of most people that's pretty obvious. So, and I'll prove that in the Court of Appeal and ultimately at the Supreme Court. If I want to smoke pot once a month or whatever, I'm certainly not a criminal. I don't engage in anything I would consider criminal. Sure. They offered me a deal today. Basically, I'll have to forfeit the inventory they seized, which is quite substantial. But all the new charges from December, which I think there's 5 or 6, they'll just lump them all together with the charges that I was convicted on today, and I'll get a $1,000 fine. One-shot deal, everything else is forgotten. And they'll also cut Sarah loose, which is wonderful. I didn't really want her to be dragged through this for another 2 years like Jordan was.
I'm just tired of the whole thing, to tell you the truth. I understand why Chris has done it, but it's been a drain on us. It's been a drain on him. It's been a drain on his health. I know he feels very, very strongly about it, and I'm sure he's going to carry it right through to the end.
If every member of Parliament could hear the evidence that was presented at Chris's trial, then they would be educated and they'd realize that the law is really unjust.
Cannabis is illegal in Canada, at least in part because we're signatory to a United Nations convention called the Single Convention on Narcotics.
Nonsense. And this is one of the myths they tell you. Oh, international treaties? We are required to have stupid drug laws that criminalize people and don't work. It's written right in the, the Single Convention. I mean, I've read the drug treaties. The drug treaties don't require us to have anything like the new legislation or anything close.
Notwithstanding everything that's happened, broadly in this country, attitudes, at least to my eye, have not shifted sufficiently that we're going to move the yardsticks on something like the decriminalization of marijuana. I just don't think that social attitudes have made that shift. Maybe what shifted are the attitudes of the baby boomers.
When I used to do television or radio shows 15 years ago and I talked about cannabis, the response was very negative from 80-90% of the callers or from the host on occasion. But today, it's very different. 80 or 90% of the people agree with what I'm saying. My view has become mainstream. That is that we should decriminalize possession of cannabis.
I am a fan of decriminalization. I started speaking about legalization 20 years ago, but here's what I want. I want decriminalization to occur immediately. Decriminalization which says the possession and the cultivation of small amounts of cannabis cannot be an offense for which one goes to jail. In fact, I think it should not be a crime. Now, then the future in which people make decisions about should there be regulation, should there be a state monopoly, should there be sales in drugstores, what are we going to do, how are we going to quality control, I'll let my children take care of that, because it's going to be a big problem. But right now, decriminalization. I want no one ever again to go to jail for the possession of marijuana, ever.
People in 72 were sitting back smoking a joint and say, I'll be smoking a joint legally next year. And the same people are just the stepping stone, right? One's down, next one comes up, right? And sooner or later, like I said, things are going to have to change, right? People are can only run from the truth for so long, right? So it's inevitable that things are going to go how we wanted them to go this time. It's obviously it's going to take a little bit more.
I think the first step in sort of acquiring hope is going to be education.
One thing that Chris's trial has done is I think at least it's got the thing out in the open and people are starting to talk about it.
And I must say, when Chris came home from Ryerson with all his research you've heard about, and he was trying to explain to me the truth about hemp and cannabis and marijuana, I was not interested. I could care less.
I remember how quick I was to condemn, and judge. And I think it's almost like I didn't deserve an opinion until I found out more about the issue.
I started going through some of his research and I got hooked. It was really fascinating. It was very, very interesting and I learned a lot that I didn't know about. Mm-hmm. And then he taught me a lot.
Essentially what I said was that this is a matter for Parliament, not a matter for the courts.
Do you think Parliament will ever deal with this?
I think eventually they probably will. They're the same as the Parliament of South Australia, the Capital Territory. I think that those places they acted because they became fully informed as to all the ramifications.
So you think it's just a lack of information?
Oh, I think it's a lack. To a large extent, it is. The results of my trial, I learned things that I'd never ever heard before. From the reading of my judgment, you can see that my attitude is certainly not one of total condemnation for anybody that is in possession of a small amount of marijuana, but it can be harmful to young people. The controls that need to be in place are controls, in my view, that can only be imposed by Parliament, not by courts.
The threat of legal penalties is not an effective deterrent.
Prohibition doesn't work. Does the public know that? No. Do the police ever bother to tell them that? No. Let's take the example of ultimate surveillance in our society, our prisons. There's not a prison in Canada where drugs are not readily available. If you can't stop drugs from entering and being used in a prison where people are under guard 24 hours a day, how in hell do you expect to be able to stop it in a country that's got thousands and thousands and thousands upon thousands of kilometers of coastline and borders and ports of entry? You can't. Unless you create such an abominable surveillance society that it would make George Orwell's 1984 look like a parlor game.
There was support for Lynn Herrichie today as she made her way to London Police Headquarters. The 36-year-old mother of two suffers from multiple sclerosis and says marijuana is the only drug that eases her pain. She's now hoping to make the lawmakers understand. To do that, she attempted to light a marijuana cigarette on the steps of the police station and was immediately arrested.
If they honestly believe that this is a crime, I hope they give me the maximum sentence, whatever it is. Because otherwise, they're just saying that they're not right if they just give me a light sentence. I will reoffend. You can't rehabilitate me. I know that marijuana helps me, and I'm not going to give up that just because it's against the law.
But there will always be a debate. There will be those who say, you know, it's harmless, decriminalize it and stop wasting these resources. And I guess that's, at least for the moment, part of the political landscape.
Basically, the judge took all the evidence we presented through the 9 expert witnesses and came to the conclusion, much ado about nothing. This is about as dangerous as having a couple coffees a day. Chris was basically doing this as an act of political activism. So the deal was to wrap up all the charges into one sweet deal where he would plead guilty to everything globally and just be put on probation. The bottom line was we didn't want Chris to go to jail. Chris didn't want to go to jail. He didn't see any value in martyring himself for the cause. And once we could orchestrate this deal, his parents were very relieved, and I'm doing my job.
I've often asked the question, is there a difference between coming home at the end of the day and smoking a joint and coming home at the end of the day and having a glass of wine?
Do you smoke?
Marijuana? Occasionally, yes. Not as much as I used to.
I don't answer personal questions. I never. It's just a policy. I won't answer any personal questions.
No, I haven't, and it was when I came to the police service, it was a requirement to claim in writing that you had not used drugs or messed with any substances in any way. So I haven't had to, as a person, I haven't had to deal with that particular temptation.
I never have. Matter of fact, I had to ask them what the difference was between cannabis and hashish today.
I did smoke marijuana in Puerto Rico, but it didn't encourage me to continue because I didn't know how to inhale. And by the time they had taught me how to inhale, it hurt And I had consumed some 5 or 6 cigarettes, so I didn't feel very good. I felt silly.
No, I haven't. To my knowledge, I didn't know what marijuana looked like until I saw a hemp plant grow. And it was the one we planted, so. But I like the smell of it.
I don't care for it very much. It doesn't, I kept trying it because it made my friends so happy, so why shouldn't it? But it was never very important to me. So I'm in this for the politics and the money, not for the drugs.
No, I wasn't in that generation. It was a generation or two after I came along. And see, by the time the 60s came, I was approaching 50 years old. And I don't recall ever seeing marijuana at university. It just didn't exist.
Everybody did it. I did it. It's part of growing up in Canada.
And politicians also have admitted to smoking as well.
They don't inhale.
Did you inhale?
Well, I know from my experience as Attorney General of Canada that we still have the right against self-incrimination in this country, and I think it's a very important part of our charter.
Whose business is it anyway?
See you guys out there.